What's up, interpreters? I'm Jim Covel. I've been in the interpretation business for over 50 years now, spending a lot of time at the Monterey Bay Aquarium as the director of training and interpretation. But I've also grown up working in parks and as a park ranger and interpretive ranger. And so I've made a good career out of doing interpretation. I've got some stories to share with you today.
What's up, interpreters? This is Heather Manier, and I'm your Corporate Engagement and Partnerships Manager for NAI.
What is up, interpreters? I am NAI Executive Director Paul Caputo. Jim, such a pleasure to get to chat with you on the NAI podcast. What's up, interpreters? Holy smokes, you've been involved with this association for far longer than I have, and I've been here a long time. Obviously, you said you've been involved with interpretation for 50 years. Before we get into talking about California and Oakland, where our conference is coming up, maybe sharing some of those stories, I have had the good fortune of being around either a campfire or a deck in, I don't know, Panama or whatever. We've been a lot of places together, and I've heard a lot of your great stories. Before we get into any of those, 50 years ago, how did you get into interpretation? What was the call of interpretation half a century ago?
Well, and I'm actually a second generation interpreter. And we'll talk a little bit more about that story in a bit. So growing up around interpretation, I thought, what a great way to make a living. And so I was fortunate enough to be able to do some internships with some really good mentors, and then pick up a job doing interpretation, starting an interpretive program for a park district right out of college. And so I've been on a roll ever since.
Jim, you have been a member since 1987, basically since when NAI was formed. Life member, founder, I believe.
Yep.
Kind of a dynamic duo with your wife, Christine,
Yep.
in interpretation. Do you do you remember your first introduction to, I guess you were in the Western Interpreters Association first, right? How did that, can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So the Western Interpreters Association started back in the late 60s with interpreters and actually junior museum executives and some state parks people around the Sacramento and San Francisco Bay Area, and used to meet over coffee from time to time and share tips about what they were doing, and eventually that formed into a formal association, the Western Interpreters Association. And so that rolled around for quite a while. At the same time, the AIN was forming up on the East Coast. Actually, that started much earlier in the 50s. And then those two organizations merged in the 1980s, and I was the last president of the WIA, and Tim Merriman was the last president of AIN, and along with some very dedicated people from both those organizations that met and put together a plan for merging these organizations, then we formed the new NAI out of that. And Tim and I were happy to hand the reins over to some new folks that have really taken this organization to places we never would have expected.
Well, so we're going to be celebrating the 40th anniversary of that merger next year in St. Louis, where that
Well,
merger happened, where it was voted on by both of those organizations at a joint workshop. That is the 2027 NAI National Conference. But before we get to 2027, we've got 2026 to take care of. The 2026 National Conference is going to be in Oakland. Obviously, Oakland has just such a rich and important history within the United States, the history of the larger, I would say, the world. You were at the Monterey Bay Aquarium, obviously also in California, two very different places. I'm going to try to lump them together into one question here, Jim, which is what is that story? You're in California right now. What is the story of California that you think is so important to the nation, to the world?
well, and California early on, people came to California for the rich resources here, and that's been a big part of the story of this state going back to the late 1700s. And along with the exploitation of resources in California, we also really had a lot of involvement in conservation. And we got to see early on some of the abuses of resources. So people that cared about this state started some campaigns to protect resources, starting some of the first state parks. And of course, we all know about Yosemite and also Sequoia and what are some national parks now that started out with local conservation efforts. And then, of course, Oakland was part of that as well. And that's a story that hasn't been shared that much. But Oakland was Lake Merritt specifically was set aside as the first wildlife refuge in the United States back in 1870. So many examples around California of people that have stepped up to take care of cultural and natural resources. And then along with that, people that became wardens and rangers and eventually naturalists and interpreters. So it's been a flow of development going back to the just past the Civil War here in California.
And people, including your dad,
Yeah,
involved in this movement. Will you talk a little bit about him and his story?
yeah. And let me tell you a little bit about Lake Merritt because it was like so many of these things. It was kind of interesting how it came about. And when you come to the conference and you'll see Lake Merritt, imagine that was at one time just a slough, it was an intertidal marsh, and but it was the home to thousands of waterfowl that would come there especially during the migration times in the fall and winter. And so there was a lot of market hunting out there. There's a lot of money to be made from shooting all the ducks and geese and selling them in markets in San Francisco and Oakland. And there was a new mayor by the name of Dr. Samuel Merritt who built a beautiful home on the side of Lake Merritt. And actually, he used his own funds to build the first dam to turn the marsh into an actual lake that had a real stable shoreline. And he built a beautiful mansion on the side of that now lake. And problem was the market hunters were still out there every morning shooting ducks and geese, and they were shooting out windows in his new mansion there. So he had a real selfish agenda for setting it aside as a wildlife refuge. He didn't want hunting out there anymore. So the city adopted that ordinance in 1869, and by 1870, the state of California set it aside as a refuge, and that was the end of market hunting there. But everybody flocked along with the ducks to the new lake, and they found sailing and rowing and boating. Very wealthy people from San Francisco bought land and built beautiful summer places around the edge of Lake Merritt. So it became the real jewel of Oakland and the San Francisco Bay Area. That continued until 1915 when the first oil spill anywhere in the San Francisco Bay Area attacked a lot of those ducks. And we had a lot of oiled ducks and geese on the lake. So in most of those days, we didn't have a way to clean up waterfowl. So most of those perished. But people felt so bad about losing a lot of ducks to the oil spill that they voted to start feeding the ducks there. And so the city of Oakland would spend a chunk of change on buying grain every year for the waterfowl. And when they would feed the ducks, then huge crowds would come to the lake to watch the duck feeding every day. So that was the perfect opportunity to start to talk about waterfowl there. And I actually have to give credit to a gentleman by the name of Bugs Kane, who was a naturalist that the Boy Scout Council hired in the early 1900s. He would come down to Lakeside Park from time to time and give talks about the ducks. But then my dad arrived there in 1932. He had been a collector for the American Museum of Natural History and the California Academy of Sciences. So he was a pretty good naturalist. And he was tired of camping out in the woods and collecting birds and mammals and plants and turning them into specimens for museums. He wanted to do something with people. And he thought, here's an opportunity. Look at all these people that gather every afternoon to look at all these ducks that are being fed. So he would start showing up there kind of informally talking about waterfowl. After a year of that, there was a local service club, the Lake Merritt Breakfast Club, that took notice of that. They said, what if we pay you? Could you do that more often if we would pay you to come there every afternoon and do a talk? And he said, sure. So, of course, it was a little odd because he was supposed to be the city naturalist, but the city didn't have any money for that. So he had the naturalist uniform, but he actually was paid by the local service club. And they paid him all of $2.50 a month for that. So, and that actually continued off and on until about 1947. They started to pay him a little bit more through the years. But 1947, the city of Oakland finally adopted a budget to officially pay a city naturalist there. And as far as I know, and as far as he knew, that was the first municipal park naturalist anywhere in the United States also, going back to that era. So, and that continued the program. Now it was the naturalist program, and that's something in our field. We really didn't have interpreters in that era. People were darn good naturalists, and of course they knew all their ologies. They could name the name of just about any plant or animal or bird or insect that they came across. But the whole science of interpretation, adding that communications element, was something that came about a little bit farther on into the 50s and 60s. My dad was proud of being a naturalist, and that was his official title, but he never thought of himself as an interpreter. And so it's been interesting to watch that development through my life that most of us are interpreters now, but under that interpreter, there's usually a pretty good naturalist also that has an affinity for some kind of resource, cultural or natural resource.
Well, that was certainly the case for you. A big portion of your career was spent at the Monterey Bay Aquarium,
Mhm.
where interpretation was really very much a focus. And that's not always the case at aquariums, right? Like they've got a lot of aquariums have great naturalists, as you point out,
Mhm.
but not necessarily a focus on interpretation. The Monterey Bay Aquarium is widely regarded as, one of the best, if not the best aquariums in the United States. It's really widely beloved, and I think that that interpretation program is a huge part of that. How did you get involved with the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and why organizationally did the aquarium have that focus on interpretation?
So, and I have to credit our founders at the aquarium, the four scientists that there were scientists and educators, and when they put the aquarium together, they realized that, and we've always had a strong education program there as well, but for the general visitation, for our public audience, there was something missing there that interpretation was a little bit different, and our founders toured around a lot of other museums and aquariums and zoos when they were planning this aquarium. And they saw that there were interpreters that just seemed to be able to connect to the public audience a little more effectively than the educators. And the educators certainly were doing a great job with school groups and school programs, but for the general public, that was a little bit different. They knew early on that they wanted an interpretive program there. They got some inspiration from East Bay Regional Parks and some other park agencies around California that did an exceptional job with interpretation. And when they were advertising for that position, uh, I had been running an interpretive program for a park district in Sacramento. And a grad student that I worked with at Davis was at the aquarium heading up their education program. And she called one day and said, they're looking for somebody that I think does the same kind of stuff you do. You should apply. And I did. And um, it was one of the founders that said, we're looking for an interpreter. And I remember saying, I bet you have a lot of scientists here at the aquarium. Maybe you need some more people that can deal with all of the visitors, the audience that comes in here, and communicating more effectively with your audience. And they bought it because they offered me the job, and I was there for the next 35 years.
In all those years, did you have a favorite exhibit or a favorite animal or something that just really drew you?
You know, I kind of hate to say that. I get that question a lot.
Yeah.
And what I've always loved at the aquarium, we have an aviary with some shorebirds and seabirds. And that's always been my favorite exhibit because I grew up with birds there at Lake Merritt. I spent all my spare time around Lakeside Merritt with Lakeside with the banding birds and helping feed the birds. And so when I got the aquarium, I found the birds there, and it's like, oh, I'm home.
Jim, is the Monterey Bay Aquarium part of that? Is it a county? Is it in independent aquarium?
It's actually owned and operated by the Monterey Bay Aquarium Foundation. And so it's always been an independent NFO, non-for-profit foundation. And David Packard set up the foundation that way so that we didn't have to deal with politics at any level, that we were independent and we could develop our own donation base and as well as sell tickets to the aquarium. So it's always been a foundation, and that gives us some real advantages in terms of how we've operated.
Well, speaking of politics, Jim, one of the other facets of your career that we have not touched on yet is that you were involved in leadership positions in NAI for many years, culminating with a term as the president of the association.
Mhm.
That, obviously, you were a founder in 1987, when the organizations merged. Your level of involvement extended way beyond just being a member. You went on to leadership positions. Why was it important to you to serve in a leadership position in your professional association?
Boy, that is a good question. I've always cared deeply about this organization. I was one of the parents, and watching the organization grow and of course, like any growing organization, we had a few challenges along the way, and we've always had a real active board. Working with a board is an interesting thing. You have a lot of different voices on the board, and that is the strength of having a board. But being able to meld all those voices and move things forward is, I've become a real fan of that because that's a skill that is not easy to do. And I guess because I knew the profession well, because I knew a lot of the membership, I felt like I could accomplish something on the board by helping the the, the different voices on the board to come together to move things forward. And we had a lot of spirited conversations about things, and that was good. We wound up with good results from that. So it was really rewarding to be on the board. And I really appreciate it's a volunteer board, and people that have a lot of other things going on in their lives step up to be on that board and devote time and energy to it. And I've always really appreciated that. I think having spent some time on the board, it just deepened my appreciation for it. So it was a great experience. And I've moved on to be the president of several other boards for other organizations based on what I learned at NAI.
Do you have anything that you're proudest of about your leadership time with NAI?
I remember one of the things, it's funny, the things that were some of the more difficult things wound up being some of the most rewarding things. And I remember we hit a point, we were growing pretty rapidly, which is wonderful, but we were still, and you would really appreciate this, we were still operating out of 3x5 cards in a shoebox kind of level of documentation and organizing services and so on. And that worked for a long time. But finally, there was enough of us in the organization. We had to modernize what we were doing. So we decided to invest in basically computerizing our records and membership services and putting all that together. And that was a huge step, and it was a difficult step, and it was a lot of money. And we didn't have a lot of money to spend on things. So that was like I said, quite a spirited conversation to decide if we were going to do that or not. And I think the other thing, just helping to pull together the resources to make sure we had an office when we needed an office as well. That was a big accomplishment from a whole lot of people that supported that. And a lot of things have changed since then. Offices are not the thing they used to be a few years ago, but that was really rewarding at the time.
Jim, normally the sort of trite question to ask someone who's been in a field for a long time is how has the field changed over all these years?
Hmm.
I'm not going to ask that question. I want to know how is this field the same now as it was 50 years ago when you got started?
Wow. Gosh, the audience is still the same and with 50 years working with people, I think maybe I do have that perspective that the families that come to the aquarium or families that come to, I sit on the board for a park district here now in our area. And the families that come to those places for programs are very similar. They look a little bit different, but their motives are still there. It's still parents bringing their kids to learn about nature and to value nature and to do something together as a family. And that has been rock solid in all the years. And actually, I could reach back and watching all the programs my dad did. That has stayed solid throughout all that time. And we look different, we dress different. Um, Now everybody's got devices with them. We have a lot more tools to work with as interpreters. It was pretty rudimentary when we first started doing interpretation, but the audience is still there for the same reasons in many regards. And I think that's important because it reminds us that it's the fundamentals of what we do are still there. We have lots of other ways to address it, lots of tools now that we didn't have before. But the foundations of what we're here to do, I think, are still pretty solid. And hopefully that's going to continue well into the future, that there's still a real need for what we do.
Your dad was sort of involved in with the city, right? The city of
Hmm.
Oakland.
Yeah.
Do you believe that it is the cities, county, state, that community? Do you believe that it's their responsibility to promote the importance of conservation, wildlife, preservation? I guess I'm wondering, like with the Monterey Bay Aquarium being a private entity, your dad's coming from a public place. I mean, is it everybody who has that responsibility to kind of promote this conservation, or whose responsibility is it,
Yeah.
right? Like because it's important and we have to, as interpreters, relay that our passion to the public and hopes that they are engaged and interested and maybe want to make a change. So where do you think the responsibility lies now with that dissemination of that information and
Yeah.
knowledge and education?
Yeah. That's a great question because it seems like it has changed through the years. After World War II, seems like people would, especially a lot of the folks who are involved in the war, which affect the entire country one way or another, people just wanted to have a good job and a nice home and a family. And a lot of cities jumped in, and counties and states really stepped up to provide recreational opportunities, educational opportunities. They really, and I watched that in Oakland. Oakland put together a tremendous park system. Bill Mott was the park superintendent there for a number of years in that era, and so that was a big part of the identity of the community. And a big part of the foundation for that sense of community was provided by local government. And of course, people paid a lot of taxes to support that as well. And what I've seen through the years now is local governments, especially at least in parts of California and a lot of other parts of the country, grapple with a lot of other issues that they didn't have 20 or 30 years ago. You know, homelessness and crime and providing good education and those kinds of things, which are big demands on cities. And so I think there's still a sense that government should be responsible for that. But I think also a lot of, at all levels of government, feel like there's so many other things screaming in their ear also that they are responsible for, that I feel like recreation and interpretation, parks, cultural programs have been pushed farther down the priority list. At the same time, what I've seen then is the NGOs coming in to help fill that gap. And so I look at a lot of places now, the zoos and aquariums and museums may be run by um, NGOs when maybe they were originally built or operated by a government entity. That's kind of rewarding in some way, seeing other parts of the community step in to still sponsor and provide for those services that are such a key part of our quality of life when the city or whatever level of government may not have the resources to support that in a way that they used to. And I've seen that in Oakland, where there are a number of foundations that have taken over the Oakland Zoo. It's a fabulous zoo. It's run by the Zoo Society with a little bit of input from the city. At Round Lake Merritt, there's a number of NGOs that provide a lot of the interpretive and educational services there now that at one time maybe the city might have provided most of that. The city still does a little bit, but a lot of other people are helping to share that. And I won't say burden because it's a joy for everybody. But it's been interesting for good programs like that. Communities have found a way to continue going forward with them, but it hasn't always been easy. It's a great question.
Jim, we're a little bit up against the clock
Yeah.
here, but I do have one more question for you because I was so struck by the description you had of your father, taking on the personal responsibility of interpreting the ducks
Yeah.
and doing so obviously without the benefit of formal training in interpretation. So clearly he had a knack for it, but interpretation now is there's been trainings developed and there's a common language and there's a lot more formality across government agencies and that sort of thing. So I've always been curious with this field, how much of it is you just have a knack for communicating, and how much of it is understanding the science, going through the training, being, having that sort of formal approach to the profession of interpretation. And it sounds like your father was such a great example of someone who just understood it innately, but then the field has, progressed in so many ways since then. So I hope you understand the sense of my question. I
Oh
know I'm
yeah.
not phrasing it very well, but it is, it's something that I was thinking about as you were telling that story.
Yeah. No, and you're right on. I think education, we can learn a lot of techniques. We can learn the science of communications, and of course all the technology that we bring to interpretation now. That's that's important background to have. You also have to have that personal passion for what you're doing. Schools can enhance that, but I think people walk into the profession with that. What my dad, he loved plants and birds and animals and he loved people. And so it just made sense to connect all those up. One of the mentors I had at East Bay Regional Park for many years, Josh Barkin, worked in a lamp store in Berkeley for years, and then he just walked into Tilden Park one day and enchanted people, and they hired him to be an interpreter or a naturalist there. And I've had a couple of interpreters that have worked with me through the years that didn't have the academic background in interpretation, but by God, they could enchant people. It was pure passion, and that was contagious. And so there are some intangible ingredients that go into interpretation. And I think, any of us, especially nowadays, if you've stayed with interpretation for a while, you have to have a passion for it because you've got to overcome a lot of other things nowadays, and you've got to really be just deep down inside, really dedicated to connecting resources to people. I can talk to just about any interpreter that's been in this business for a while, and that passion is right there. And I think that's a big part that we all share in this business.
Jim, it just strikes me how your dad's passion affected an entire community. And you say he wasn't an interpreter, but we might say he was an interpreter. Maybe he didn't say he was an interpreter, but we would say he's an interpreter. And then you also affected an entire community at Monterey Bay Aquarium. Like what an amazing legacy you and your dad have in in California, and also Christine. Leave out Christine, your wife.
If you're in this business and you've been at it for a while, you have the luxury of looking back on people that you have touched along the way. And I look at my dad. I mean, people who are teenagers who used to hang out at Lakeside Park and help with cleaning up cages and things like that. They became prominent scientists, biologists, and wildlife photographers, and interpreters and naturalists, and they got excited about that, by my dad's passion.
Mhm.
And some of the people that I've worked with through the years that have been interns or that I've worked with that have moved on and really made contributions to this business or other areas of science. And so, if you're ever having a bad day, take a look at the people that you have touched and what a difference they have made, and that maybe you played a little role in lighting that spark that launched them off in a very meaningful direction in their life. That's But that's, I like getting a paycheck once in a while, but that's even better than a lot of the paychecks I've had through the years.
What's the line about interpreters get paid in sunsets?
Yeah,
And rainbows.
yeah,
So Jim, before we let you go, what are you working on now?
yeah. I have revived the Western Interpreters Press, which was a little business that my dad started when he retired. He realized that he worked with some amazing people. He had some incredible stories, and he put those in a couple of books. People Are for the Birds is kind of the story of Lake Merritt and the story of the interpretive program there at Lakeside Park. So there's a good history available there. My dad also collected the stories of other interpreters. He published that as Beacons Along a Naturalist Trail. Those will both be available on Amazon now. And so I feel good about that because they're good stories that need to be retold. When I'm no longer able to tell those stories, people can still read for themselves in some of those books.
Well, Jim, I just have to say on a personal note that it's been such a pleasure to get to work with you all of these years at NAI, and your steadfast support of both the association through your time and your energy, and not to gloss over the fact that you have made significant financial contributions to the organization as well. So grateful for that, but also just getting to know you over the years, and your support of me and of the NAI staff has been so critically important in my time with NAI. So before we let you go, I do want to just say a heartfelt thank you to you for all that you've done for NAI and for me personally.
Well, it's been a joy all the way along to watch the profession grow, to watch people like you grow in the profession. Very proud of maybe playing a little bit of role in many of those things.
And interpreters, that's
And
what's
That's
that's
what's
what's
up.
up.